The night Ethan Marlowe bought the old restaurant, he didn't plan to save anyone. He only wanted silence. But life doesn't wait for plans. It strikes when you least expect it. What would you do if you found a 6-year-old girl living beneath a restaurant you just bought, caring for 2 newborn twins all by herself? Stay until the end, because what Ethan found inside that dusty building would shatter everything he thought he knew about love, legacy, and what it means to be human. It began with a rainstorm that turned San Francisco into a mirror of flickering lights. Ethan sat in the back seat of his car, the city sliding past like a fading photograph. From the outside, he looked untouchable, heir to the Marlowe empire, a man who owned half the skyline along the bay. But inside, he felt nothing. No sound, no heartbeat worth listening to, just another deal, another signature, another day of pretending his father's death hadn't left a hole too wide to fill. When the car slowed at a red light near North Beach, Ethan saw it, a flickering sign barely hanging on above a boarded-up window. Il ricordo, it read. The memory. Something about that word pulled at him. He told his driver to stop. The man hesitated. "Sir, it's condemned property." Ethan didn't care. He stepped into the rain. The door was locked, but the glass was old. One shove and he was inside. The place smelled of damp wood and ashes, the ghosts of dinners long forgotten. A few tables still stood covered in dust, their candles melted to ghosts of wax. He moved toward the kitchen flashlight cutting through the dark, and that's when he heard a sound that didn't belong. Not pipes, not wind. A song. A woman's lullaby, faint but steady, floating from below the floor. Ethan froze. The melody was too human to ignore. He followed it to a small trap door near the pantry, the kind no blueprint would list. The hinges whined as he pulled it open, a breath of warm air escaping like the building exhaled after years of silence. He climbed down the narrow steps, light trembling in his hand. What he saw stopped him cold. A little girl sat cross-legged on the concrete, holding a bottle to a baby's mouth. Another infant slept beside her, wrapped in a towel that used to be white. A battery lantern cast a soft glow over their small world, a crate for a table, a few blankets, a cassette player humming the lullaby. And despite the cold, the scene felt alive. The girl looked up, calm and fierce all at once. "You can't take them," she said. "They're my brothers." Ethan blinked, rain still dripping from his coat. "I'm not here to take anyone," he said quietly. "I just bought this place." She frowned, as if the word bought meant nothing to her. "Then you own the walls," she said, "but not us." Her name was Sophie, 6 years old. The twins, Leo and Liam, were barely 6 months. Their mother, Lucia, had worked here before it closed. "She said the oven keeps secrets," Sophie whispered. "She got sick and the secrets kept us instead." Ethan crouched, careful not to frighten her. There was so much defiance in her tiny shoulders. The cassette player clicked softly, and a woman's voice, Lucia's, filled the air again. "Sleep, my loves. Tomorrow brings light." For the first time in years, Ethan didn't know what to say. His whole life had been made of control of money solving every problem. But there in a forgotten basement under a condemned restaurant, control meant nothing. He was looking at courage in its smallest, purest form. He offered his hand. "You can't stay here. It's not safe." Sophie shook her head. "If we leave, they'll split us up. The police always do. My mom said stay until someone with a heart finds us." He hesitated. "How would she know I have one?" "She said you'd feel the song," Sophie said simply. Ethan's chest tightened. He turned toward the pizza oven above them, the one she'd mentioned. Ash clung to its edges, but inside, half buried, he saw something glinting. He reached in and pulled out a sealed envelope, edges singed but intact. On the front, written in delicate script, "To the one who loves this place next." Beneath it, his own last name, Marlowe. He stared, rain and confusion blurring everything he knew. His father had never mentioned a restaurant, never mentioned Lucia. Yet her letter had found its way here, waiting for him like a prophecy. Sophie's voice broke the silence. "Can we go now?" she asked. "The babies are hungry." Ethan looked at her. This little soldier of love holding the world together with one hand and a bottle in the other, and realized he couldn't walk away. Not this time. He nodded slowly. "Yes, we're going." They climbed the stairs, Sophie carrying one twin, Ethan the other. Outside, the rain had softened into a mist. A stray dog trotted up, tail wagging, and Sophie smiled for the first time. "That's Pepper. He watches us," she said as if the dog had always been part of the deal. Ethan opened the car door, his driver staring in disbelief at the small army of innocents crowding into the back seat. He didn't offer an explanation. Some moments don't need words. As the car pulled away, Sophie turned to the window, pressing her palm to the glass. "It's still our home," she whispered. Ethan looked at the reflection of the children in the window. 3 lives tangled with his, and knew nothing about his life would ever be the same again. The letter in his pocket felt heavy, almost alive. He didn't open it. Some secrets reveal themselves only when you've earned them. And as the city lights faded behind them, the lullaby played once more from Sophie's small cassette. Tomorrow brings light. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the light had already begun. Ethan Marlowe had never noticed how loud silence could be until 3 children entered his home. His penthouse, perched above the San Francisco Bay, was a museum of modern taste steel marble glass, and nothing resembling a life lived. That night, though, as he carried the sleeping twins past the sleek kitchen counters and into the living room, something shifted. The air felt warmer, less sterile. Sophie trailed behind him, her small feet silent on the cold floor, her wide eyes scanning every detail of the space that now towered over her like another world. He placed the babies carefully on the white leather couch, their tiny hands curling instinctively around the folds of the blanket. Sophie stayed close, straight-backed and watchful, like a small guardian who'd already lived too many storms. "They can't sleep alone," she said softly. "They wake up scared if they don't feel me near." Ethan nodded. "We'll figure something out." He turned when the door opened. His assistant Clara Nguyen stepped in holding a folder and froze mid-step. "You said it was urgent," she began, her words dying at the sight before her. "Who are those babies?" "Yes," Ethan said. "They're staying here for the night." Clara blinked. "Sir, you can't just bring children into your home. There are laws. There's your reputation. The board will do what it always does." Ethan interrupted, his voice steady but low. "Talk too much and feel too little." Clara's expression softened, but she sighed. "I'll find supplies, formula diapers, whatever we can get this late." She hesitated, then added, "Just tell me you know what you're doing." Ethan looked at the children. "Not yet," he admitted, "but I will." When she left, the room fell quiet again except for the soft breathing of the twins. Sophie sat near them, holding one bottle she'd packed from her worn backpack. The routine was second nature to her gentle, precise patient. Ethan watched, struck by how capable she was at such a young age. "You've done this before," he said. She nodded without looking up. "Every night, sometimes every 2 hours. Leo likes to eat first, but Liam cries louder." He smiled faintly. "You've got them figured out." Her eyes flicked to him. "Do you have kids?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he said, almost to himself. "I barely have time for myself." "Maybe that's why you look tired all the time," Sophie said matter-of-factly, then offered the second bottle to him. "Here, you can feed him. He likes to be held on the left side." Ethan hesitated, then followed her instructions. The baby squirmed, then settled against his arm, eyes half open. He could feel the warmth of that tiny body through his shirt, hear the small sighs as the baby drank. Something inside him cracked open, not pain exactly, but something older, something human. By the time Clara returned with bags of baby supplies and a few groceries, the penthouse had transformed. The floor was cluttered with blankets, the couch served as a makeshift nursery, and Ethan was sitting cross-legged on the rug with a bottle in one hand and a burp cloth over his shoulder. Clara stood there astonished. "I leave you alone for an hour and you've turned into Mr. Rogers," she muttered. "Don't start," Ethan said, smiling for the first time in days. "Just help me figure out how to warm baby food without starting a fire." Clara shook her head, but her tone softened. "I never thought I'd see the day." Later, after the babies were fed and asleep, Ethan brought Sophie a cup of warm milk. She was sitting by the window legs, tucked beneath her, staring at the skyline. "You can see everything from up here," she said quietly. "It's pretty, but kinda sad." No one waves. Ethan joined her. "It's a view people pay millions for." She tilted her head. "Then why does it feel so lonely?" He didn't answer. She looked up at him, then serious and unafraid. "Mom said people with everything sometimes forget what they really need." Her words lingered. Ethan found himself studying her face, the calm wisdom there, the steadiness. He wondered what kind of woman Lucia must have been to raise such a child. He helped her set up a small bed beside the twins, arranging cushions and blankets. When she lay down, one hand resting protectively on each baby, he realized he'd never seen anything so fragile or so strong. "Good night, Mr. Ethan," she murmured. "Good night, Sophie." He turned off the lights and stood in the quiet glow of the city outside. His penthouse, once a shrine to solitude, now pulsed with small rhythmic sounds. Soft breathing, the creak of blankets, the faint hum of life returning to a place long devoid of it. He walked into the kitchen where the remains of their midnight chaos still lay, scattered spilled milk, a spoon, a pacifier, and a crumpled napkin covered in childish doodles. Among them sat his mother's old pocket watch, the one Sophie had found earlier and quietly fixed with a hair tie. It ticked steadily on the counter, alive again, after years of silence. He picked it up and turned it in his hand. It kept perfect time. For a long while he just listened to the clock, the babies, the city. All his life Ethan had measured success by deals, closed properties bought, numbers tallied. But none of that compared to this, the sound of belonging he hadn't realized he'd been starving for. He stood there until dawn, the first light spilling across the floor, catching on the glass walls and reflecting the faintest warmth back into the room. For once, he didn't feel like an observer of his own life. He felt present, rooted, alive. And in the soft light of morning, Ethan Marlowe finally understood he hadn't rescued anyone that night. It was they who had rescued him. The first time Ethan returned to Il Ricordo after bringing the children home, the morning fog still clung to the rooftops of North Beach. He stood in front of the old restaurant, its faded lettering glinting faintly under the weak sunlight. The place was smaller than he remembered, quieter, but it pulled at something inside him that felt both ancient and familiar. Sophie stood beside him, one hand wrapped around his, the other, clutching a small notebook covered in stickers. The twins were with Clara that morning, leaving the two of them alone to face the ghosts of a place that had once been a home. Ethan unlocked the door. The scent of dust and forgotten meals hung in the air, mixed with something faintly sweet like the memory of a kitchen that refused to die. Sophie moved ahead of him, her small sneakers leaving prints on the dusty floor. "It doesn't look so bad," she said, her voice echoing softly. "It just needs love again." He smiled at her certainty. "Then, I guess we'd better start." In the days that followed, Ethan threw himself into rebuilding Il Ricordo. What began as a whim quickly became a mission. He called contractors, designers, and even tracked down some of the restaurant's original suppliers. But unlike his business ventures, this wasn't about profit margins or efficiency. Every nail hammered, every tile replaced, carried a weight he hadn't felt in years' purpose. Sophie became his small but fearless project manager. She walked the rooms with a clipboard Clara had given her, making notes in crayon. The walls should be yellow, she declared one morning, standing on a stool to reach eye level with a painter. Like sunlight. Mommy said yellow makes people feel warm before the food even comes. Ethan looked up from the blueprints, amused. "You're the boss here, huh?" "I'm just listening to her," Sophie said, simply pointing toward the kitchen. "She's still here, you know." "Mom, you can feel her." And somehow, Ethan did. While workers scraped and sanded, Sophie wandered through the kitchen drawers, rescuing old utensils and polishing tarnished silverware. She found a wooden spoon carved with the initials L.S. Lucia Santos. This was hers, she whispered, tracing the letters with her finger. Ethan watched the reverence in her movements, the care in her voice, and he felt a pang of respect for a woman he'd never met but owed so much to. The renovation drew attention. Passers-by stopped to watch the progress, curious about why a billionaire was personally supervising a forgotten restaurant on a quiet corner. The neighborhood, once skeptical, began to rally around the project. Retired chef Marco Rossi, who had cooked with Lucia years ago, offered to help restore the kitchen. "Your father's hotel fired her," Marco said one afternoon, wiping flour from his hands. "But this place, this was her real heart. I see the same spark in the little one." Ethan listened, but said nothing. The truth of Marco's words sat heavy in his chest. The Marlowe family had built an empire on ambition, not compassion. Now, piece by piece, Ethan was trying to build something different. By the third week, the kitchen began to look alive again. Ethan stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, trying to follow Sophie's instructions for Lucia's tomato sauce. "Not too fast," she warned, wagging her wooden spoon. "You'll make it angry. Sauce likes patience." He tried not to laugh. "You're telling me the sauce has feelings, it does. If you want it to taste right," she replied with perfect seriousness. The scent that filled the air was unlike anything he'd ever known. Simple, comforting, pure. It wasn't just food, it was memory. Warmth, love turned tangible. When Sophie tasted the result, she nodded solemnly. "You're getting there. Still not mommy good, but close." Ethan felt absurdly proud. That night, after the workers left, he stayed behind to sort through a stack of Lucia's old ledgers they'd found tucked away in the office. Among receipts and scribbled recipes, one notebook stood out. The pages were filled with musical notes instead of words. Confused, he carried it to the old upright piano near the dining area, long since out of tune. He played a few of the notes and froze. It wasn't random, it was a melody, soft and haunting, the same one Sophie had hummed the night he found her. He called her over. "Listen to this," he said, playing the tune again. Sophie's eyes widened. That's her song. The lullaby she sang to us. Together, they deciphered the pages, realizing each recipe was hidden behind a corresponding melody. Lucia hadn't just cooked, she'd composed her dishes. She said, "Food is like music," Sophie murmured. "It only matters if you feel it." Ethan closed the notebook carefully. "Then we'll make sure the world feels it again." By the end of the month, Il Ricordo had transformed. The walls were painted a soft golden hue, sunlight streaming through cleaned windows. The smell of basil and fresh bread replaced the musty air. Sophie's mural families gathered around a table, spread across the main wall, bright and full of motion. The twins, now toddling, laughed as they chased each other between tables, still waiting for their chairs. Clara rolled her eyes, but smiled, secretly proud of how far Ethan had come. He wasn't the man who once bought properties without setting foot in them. He was a man who came home every night smelling of flour, his shirt stained with tomato sauce, his heart lighter than it had been in years. When they hung the sign freshly painted, but keeping the same name, Sophie stood beside him, hands on her hips, surveying the result. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But it's missing one thing. What's that?" he asked. She pointed to a corner near the window. "That's where Grandma Maria used to sit every Sunday. We should put a special table there, for her, and for Mommy." Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. "We'll do that, and we'll make sure everyone who eats here feels what they left behind." That evening, as the last rays of sun spilled through the windows, Ethan stood alone in the kitchen. He turned on the stove, listening to the soft hiss of the flame. The air was alive again, filled with purpose. He picked up Lucia's wooden spoon and stirred the sauce slowly, just as Sophie had taught him. When he looked up, his reflection shimmered in the window, different, softened, unguarded. For the first time in a long time, Ethan Marlowe wasn't thinking about profit or legacy. He was thinking about belonging. And as he listened to the faint hum of the city outside, he realized that Il Ricordo wasn't just being rebuilt, it was rebuilding him too. The storm began long before the rain. It started the day Ethan received a letter from the city's Department of Child Welfare. The words were polite, official, and sharp as glass. "We've received a report regarding 3 minors currently under your care without legal guardianship." Ethan read it twice, then set it down, staring at the steady drizzle outside his office window. He had known this day would come. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. Il Ricordo had just begun to find its rhythm. The smell of slow-simmered sauce lingered in the mornings, laughter echoed through the kitchen, and every day felt more like a home than a business. Sophie had started school proudly, showing her classmates pictures of our restaurant. The twins, Leo and Liam, had learned to walk their tiny footsteps, following Ethan everywhere. And for the first time in his life, he woke up feeling like he belonged to something real. Now, with one letter, all of it stood on the edge of being taken away. When Clara walked into his office and saw the paper, her expression darkened. "We can fight this," she said quickly. "Hire the best attorneys, get the paperwork started. You've already filed for temporary guardianship. I filed for love," Ethan interrupted quietly. "I didn't plan for bureaucracy." Sophie noticed the tension before anyone told her. She was sharper than most adults. That night, when she found Ethan sitting alone at the restaurant's bar, his tie loosened and his eyes tired, she climbed onto the stool beside him. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked softly. "The people who decide where kids go." He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. But I'm not going to let anyone take you or your brothers." Sophie looked down at her hands. "They took a friend of mine once. They said it was better for her, but she cried every night because her brother went somewhere else." Her voice trembled. "Please don't let them split us up." Ethan's throat tightened. "I won't," he said firmly. "I promise. But promises can't stop the rain." 2 days later, as a storm rolled in from the bay, 2 officials arrived at Il Ricordo. The restaurant was closed for the day, the chairs stacked neatly on tables, the smell of fresh bread still warm in the air. Sophie sat in the corner holding Leo and Liam, her eyes wide and wary. The woman from Child Welfare, Ms. Carver, spoke kindly, but with the measured tone of someone used to taking children away. "We understand your intentions, Mr. Marlowe," she said. "But good intentions don't replace legal guardianship. We need to verify the children's situation and determine what's best for them." "What's best for them," Ethan replied, "is not losing the only home they've known since their mother died." The twins began to fuss, and Sophie stood up quickly, protective, brave. "We don't need another home," she said. "We already have one." The words hung in the air, raw and trembling. After the officials left, Sophie disappeared. The rain outside had turned to sheets of water pounding against the windows like warning drums. When Clara realized she was gone, panic spread through the restaurant. Ethan searched every corner, every alley, his heart pounding like thunder. Then he remembered the basement. He found her there, sitting on the cold floor beside the old oven, holding both twins in her lap. She was crying silently, the sound barely audible over the storm outside. "I thought if we stayed here they wouldn't find us," she whispered. "This is where she left us. This is where you found us." Ethan knelt beside her, soaked to the bone. "You don't have to hide anymore, Sophie. You're not alone." She shook her head. "What if they take us anyway?" He took a deep breath, his hand resting on the oven door. "Then I'll fight them. I'll fight until there's nothing left to fight with." As he spoke, his fingers brushed against something uneven in the brickwork. He frowned, pressing harder, until a small compartment clicked open. Inside was a sealed envelope, brittle with age. On the front, written in faded ink, "Lucia Santos." He opened it slowly. It was a will, Lucia's will. In clear, careful handwriting, she had left the restaurant, its name, and everything inside it to her children, Sophie, Leo, and Liam. There was a paragraph at the end, one that made Ethan's hands tremble. "If my children are ever found here, I ask that whoever loves this place, as I did, take care of them, not as charity, but as family." The weight of it hit him like lightning. Lucia had known. Somehow, she had known this place would bring them back and that someone would come who could finish what she started. He looked at Sophie, who watched him with tear-streaked cheeks. "Your mother," he said softly, "she left you more than memories. She left proof that this is yours." Sophie stared at the paper, then at him. "Does that mean they can't take us?" Ethan smiled, though his eyes were wet. "It means we have something to fight with now. Something stronger than money." They stayed there until the rain slowed to a whisper. When they finally went upstairs, the restaurant glowed with the warm, yellow light Sophie had chosen for the walls. Clara was waiting, relief flooding her face. Ethan handed her the document. "Get this filed," he said. "We have a battle to win." That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan sat alone at one of the new tables, the sound of rain still tapping against the glass. For the first time since his father's death, he felt him there, not the stern businessman, but the man who once taught him how to dream. Ethan whispered into the empty room, "I'm fixing what we broke, Dad. I'm learning how to build something that lasts." Outside, the storm began to fade, the clouds parting just enough for the first faint stars to appear. Inside, the faint melody of Lucia's lullaby drifted from Sophie's old cassette player, playing softly from the corner of the kitchen. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring questions, papers, and lawyers. But for now, there was peace. The kind of peace that comes only after you've walked through the storm and realize that light, no matter how faint, always finds its way back home. The day of the grand reopening began with sunlight spilling through the windows of Il Ricordo, painting golden lines across the freshly polished tables. The air inside smelled of roasted garlic-baked bread and something more, subtle hope. Outside, a crowd had already begun to gather. Neighbors who'd watched the restaurant come back to life stood side by side with city officials, reporters, and a handful of curious tourists drawn in by the story that had swept across San Francisco. Ethan Marlowe stood near the kitchen, adjusting the cuffs of his rolled-up shirt. He looked nothing like the billionaire heir the news had painted him to be. There was no tailored suit, no rehearsed smile, just a man who had built something with his own hands and finally understood the weight of it. Sophie darted between tables, helping Clara arrange flowers in small vases. The twins sat in a stroller nearby, babbling in their own language, their laughter bouncing off the tiled walls. "You're sure about opening the doors to everyone?" Clara asked, handing him a menu. "No reservations, no prices." Ethan nodded. Lucia cooked for people, not profit. One Sunday a month it's free, no checks, no names, just food and company. Clara smiled. "You've changed, Ethan." He looked around the room, his eyes softening. "No, Clara. I finally remembered who I was supposed to be." The months leading to this moment had been brutal. Court hearings, interviews, endless paperwork. But Lucia's will had changed everything. The moment her handwritten note surfaced, the city dropped its case and the guardianship papers were signed. Sophie, Leo, and Liam were now legally part of his family. He'd insisted the restaurant remain under their names, held in trust, until they were old enough to decide its future. Now, as the clock struck noon, Sophie climbed onto a chair near the door, holding a ribbon and a pair of scissors nearly as big as her hand. "Ready, Mr. Ethan," she called out. He laughed. "You're the boss, remember?" She grinned, raised the scissors, and cut through the ribbon with a decisive snip. The crowd erupted in applause. The doors opened and warmth filled the room. Strangers greeted each other like old friends, drawn together by the scent of fresh pasta and the sound of a local jazz trio softly playing near the window. Ethan moved through the crowd, shaking hands, thanking people. Reporters asked questions how it felt to trade boardrooms for kitchens, what his late father would think, whether the rumors about a foundation were true. He answered simply. "It's not a charity," he said. "It's a promise. A promise to keep families together through food and love. Sometimes that's all it takes." The foundation he'd started, the Lucia Project, would fund struggling family-owned restaurants across California, offering grants and mentorship instead of loans. "If we can help one parent keep the lights on, one child stay home instead of a shelter," he'd said at the launch event, "then we've done something right." As the evening deepened, Il Ricordo came alive in a way Ethan hadn't dared imagine. Marco Rossi was back in the kitchen, orchestrating dishes with the same passion he'd once shared with Lucia. The walls glowed under soft yellow lights, the mural Sophie had painted, now complete a swirl of faces, laughing, eating, living. At the center of it, she'd painted her mother, a woman with kind eyes holding a wooden spoon surrounded by children. At one point, Ethan caught Sophie watching the mural with a faraway look. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She nodded slowly. "I just wish she could see it." "She can," he said gently. "Every time someone walks through those doors, she's right here." Sophie smiled, then a small, quiet smile that carried more strength than words ever could. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pocket watch she'd fixed for him months ago. It was ticking steadily. "You should wear it tonight," she said. "Mom said time doesn't heal everything. It just gives us a chance to make things right." Ethan fastened it to his wrist. The sound of it blended with the hum of the restaurant, steady and alive. Later that night, after the last guest left and the lights dimmed, Ethan stood behind the bar, watching Clara stack glasses and Marco lock up the kitchen. Sophie was dozing off on a booth seat, one twin tucked under each arm. The quiet felt sacred. Clara leaned against the counter. "You know, this might be the first time I've seen you still since I met you." He smiled faintly. "Still doesn't mean done." She nodded toward the dining room. "You did it, Ethan. You turned a tragedy into a home." He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the mural again, to Lucia's painted smile, to the words etched in small letters beneath it. Some recipes feed hunger. Others feed the soul. "I think it turned me into one, too," he said finally. Clara left, and for a long while, Ethan stood alone in the empty restaurant. He walked to the center of the room, where the old oven still stood polished and warm. The same oven that had hidden Lucia's letter. He reached out and placed a hand on the stone surface. The hum of heat against his palm felt like a heartbeat. He took a deep breath and spoke softly into the quiet. "Thank you, Lucia, for trusting me with them." From somewhere behind him came the soft creak of Sophie's voice, half asleep. "You're welcome, Mr. Ethan." He turned, smiling. She was still curled up with her brothers, dreaming a faint grin on her face. He covered them with a blanket and sat nearby, listening to the rain beginning again. Outside, gentle this time, no longer a storm, just a rhythm. When he finally looked up, the reflection in the restaurant's front window caught his eye. It wasn't the sleek man he used to be, the one who measured his worth in numbers. It was a father, a friend, a man who'd rebuilt not just a restaurant, but a life. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, and he whispered almost to himself, "Tomorrow we start again." The pocket watch ticked softly in reply, steady and sure, as if keeping time not for what had been lost, but for everything that had been found. Outside, a new sign hung above the door, freshly painted in gold Il Ricordo, the memory. Below it, in smaller letters, a single line glowed under the lamplight, a place where every heart finds its home. And for Ethan Marlowe, standing there in the quiet glow of the restaurant, he'd once only meant to buy, that promise finally felt true. When all the lights of Il Ricordo faded that night, Ethan Marlowe stood by the window watching the last reflections of the city ripple across the glass. The man who had once lived his life in silence and steal alone in a penthouse of marble was now surrounded by the soft sounds of family. Sophie's laughter echoed faintly from the kitchen, the twins' sleepy murmurs filled the air, and the restaurant that had once been abandoned now glowed with warmth and purpose. Ethan's journey had come full circle. What began as a simple real estate purchase turned into a rebirth. In the ruins of an old restaurant, he had found not just 3 children, but the missing pieces of himself. Sophie, Leo, and Liam taught him what years of success and power never could, that love doesn't demand perfection. It simply asks that you show up again and again with an open heart. He once believed legacy was built through ownership, wealth, and control, but through rebuilding Il Ricordo, Ethan learned that true legacy is built through compassion, the kind that feeds not only stomachs but spirits. Lucia's will had handed him more than responsibility. It had handed him redemption. Every meal served, every stranger welcomed, every child's laugh within those golden walls became proof that love can rebuild what life tries to break. The restaurant's new life wasn't just about food, it was about connection. Families came not for the flavor, but for the feeling. People who had nothing left found community there. And in the midst of it all, Ethan finally learned how to be still, to listen, to care. The billionaire heir had become a man who measured success not by numbers, but by how many people left Il Ricordo feeling seen and loved. If there's one truth Ethan's story leaves behind, it's this: we are never too lost to be found again. Life has a way of stripping us down until we face the truth of what we've forgotten. Kindness, humility, connection. You don't have to own a restaurant or save someone's life to make a difference. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing to care when you could have walked away. In our world today, where success is often mistaken for fulfillment, Ethan's story reminds us that meaning doesn't come from what we accumulate, it comes from what we share. The smallest act of kindness can ripple further than you'll ever know. And even in a life built on ambition, there is always room for grace. So wherever you are in your journey, remember this: you can start over. You can choose love even after loss. You can find your own Il Ricordo, a place, a purpose, a person that reminds you what truly matters. If this story touched you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps us creating more stories that celebrate hope, compassion, and second chances. Every comment, every like, every subscription helps us bring you the next story that might just change someone's life, or maybe even yours. Thank you for being part of this journey, and stay tuned for more stories that prove love always finds its way home.